My fiancé left me on my birthday for a rich doctor, so I took everything from them without lifting a finger, and when I turned 38, I figured life had finally started cooperating. I had a good job, a decent house in a quiet part of Rockford, and I was about to marry a woman I thought would grow old with me. Her name was Sierra, 33, and for 4 years, we shared everything except honesty, apparently. I should have noticed the signs earlier, but hindsight always arrives a day too late. Sierra worked pharmaceutical sales, had a habit of dressing like she was headed to brunch with celebrities, and never stopped reminding me I could do better if I'd just upgrade my life. I didn't care about brands or luxury cars. I was raised to believe a man's worth wasn't tied to the shine on his shoes. I drove a 2008 Chevy Colorado that my dad and I rebuilt when I was 22. It got me where I needed to go, and more importantly, reminded me of him. My dad passed a few years back, heart failure on a cold morning in November, and left me just enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom and the promise that I'd make something meaningful out of myself. That home was mine, and Sierra moved in during year 2. She never stopped talking about how small the kitchen was, or how the backyard wasn't landscaped properly, but she stayed. When I finally proposed, she said yes like she'd been expecting it for months. No tears, no big emotional moment, just a smile and a comment about how she already had venue ideas. Fast forward to 6 months ago, the day before my birthday. We were supposed to go out of town for the weekend, just the two of us. I'd taken time off work, cleared the fridge, and even washed her damn car. She said she had a last-minute dinner meeting with someone from her region, but she'd be home before 10. I nodded and let it go. That morning, she left a small box on the kitchen table with a pink bow and told me not to open it until she got back. It was supposed to be part of the surprise. I sat there with my cat, Murph, a one-eyed rescue who stuck to me like glue ever since I found him limping behind the grocery store dumpster. Around 8 that night, with no message from Sierra, I figured I might as well unwrap the gift. Inside the box was a charcoal hoodie with a faded band logo on the chest. Our band, supposedly, the one we saw on our first real date. I almost smiled, until I noticed the folded paper tucked into the pocket. I thought maybe it was a receipt or a ticket for a show. Instead, I pulled out a handwritten note that read, "Grant, I can't do this anymore. I found someone who makes me feel alive. The wedding, the house, the plans, we aren't what I want. I've already taken my things. Please don't call me. I'm sorry. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe part of some weird prank or social experiment. But as I walked into the bedroom and saw half the closet empty, the jewelry box gone, and my old dresser drawers left open, it sank in. Sierra hadn't just walked out. She'd ghosted me from inside my own life. I tried to call her. Straight to voicemail. Texts went unread. I sat down with a beer and stared at the wall for hours. Murph curled up at my feet like he could sense everything was crashing down. My hands were shaking, not with sadness but with some mix of disbelief and humiliation. I'd been played like a fool in my own home, and the worst part was how cleanly it had all been executed. No yelling, no fight, not even a goodbye in person, just a note in a hoodie and the smell of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I remembered something that jolted me out of my daze. Sierra wasn't tech-savvy. She never figured out how to unlink our cloud photo backup. My laptop still had access. I opened it and waited for the gallery to sync. Within minutes, the screen was filled with photos she clearly thought I'd never see. There she was, smiling in a ski lodge, holding hands with some broad-shouldered guy in designer glasses. There was a beach shot with them kissing, his hand tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. One of the files was titled "Weekend Away," and I recognized the background immediately. My car parked outside a lakeside rental we'd always talked about visiting. She used my truck to cheat on me. That thing she always mocked suddenly became convenient when it helped her sneak off with another man. I kept digging. Found texts backed up from her phone. His name was Malcolm. He was some neurosurgeon at the hospital where Sierra always did her lunch drops. Their messages made me nauseous. Her saying she couldn't wait to escape the dull life. Asking when he'd be ready to make it real. One of them was time-stamped during my work trip to Minneapolis, right after she called saying she missed me. I kept scrolling until the words blurred into white noise. I would have thrown the laptop, but I needed it now. Needed every bit of evidence I could gather. That's when I called Nate. He picked up after the second ring and sounded like he already knew why I was calling. I told him what I'd found. He sighed, then said he'd seen them together in the cafeteria, assumed it was just business. Then, weeks later, he saw them kissing in the parking lot. When I asked why he didn't tell me, he hesitated. Said Sierra warned him she'd file a harassment claim if he said anything. He's got a wife and twins, couldn't risk it. I didn't blame him. Sierra had backed him into a corner like she backed me into a life I thought we were building together. The next morning, I called my insurance agent and canceled the wedding policy. Told him what happened, and he didn't ask for more. 2 hours later, my Uncle Denny showed up on my porch with a six-pack and said he'd done the same thing for my cousin a year ago. Better a broken engagement than a broken soul, he said, cracking a can. We drank in silence. No advice, just old-school solidarity. When he left, I sat in my dad's recliner, the one Sierra always said made the living room look like a garage, and made a list. Not a revenge list. A survival list. First thing on it, change the locks. The day after I changed the locks, Sierra called like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, just a clipped demand about picking up the rest of her things. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just told her I'd boxed it all, and that since the locks were changed, she'd need to arrange a time to collect them. She scoffed, called me unreasonable, said half the house belonged to her because we were essentially married. I reminded her, calmly, that her name wasn't on the deed, the mortgage, the utilities, or a single tax return. She hung up in a rage. Later that evening, her father called. Elijah, a man I'd always suspected, saw me as a placeholder in Sierra's climb toward status. He tried to sound professional, dropping his usual lawyer tone like it was a hammer. Expect to hear from us, he said coldly. Andrea will return with police presence if needed. I didn't flinch. I told him I'd be happy to share the contents of a certain cloud backup, including photos from the weekend Sierra and her lover spent at Elijah's own cabin. There was a long pause, then a clipped, "We'll be in touch." 2 days later, a text from Sierra read simply, "What time Saturday can I get my stuff?" That told me all I needed to know. Elijah saw those photos, probably had to face his wife, and Sierra got thrown under the proverbial bus. She showed up late Saturday afternoon with her sister Clara, not her new boyfriend, which struck me as telling. Clara avoided eye contact the whole time, while Sierra stormed around loading boxes, her heels echoing on the front steps like war drums. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I just sat on the porch, sipping coffee, Murph in my lap, watching like a man who had nothing left to lose. Clara lingered as Sierra went back inside for a last round. "Sorry," she mumbled, barely above a whisper. "Not your fault," I replied, and she nodded. But then she stepped a little closer, hesitating before she added, "I think she's making a terrible mistake. Malcolm's not what she thinks he is. He's done this before, to a nurse at his old hospital. It never ends well." That planted a seed. I didn't respond, but I watched her walk away like she had just handed me a loaded weapon and hoped I wouldn't use it. That night, Clara called. Said Sierra had taken more than just clothes and makeup. She'd stolen my father's signed baseball and the antique gold watch from my grandfather, both items she'd once called dusty junk. Clara said Sierra told her she deserved compensation since I'd kept the ring. I checked the box where I'd hidden those heirlooms. Empty. My patience cracked like a windshield hit by a cinder block. This wasn't heartbreak anymore, it was war. I started gathering everything. Organized the screenshots, cataloged the messages and photos by date. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I'd need ammunition. And I wasn't about to get caught empty-handed when the next shot was fired. I stayed up every night that week, sometimes until dawn, combing hospital directories, comparing Sierra's dinner meetings to Malcolm's surgery schedules. The overlap was undeniable. I tracked her Instagram activity using our shared iPad, documented every heart, every emoji comment on Malcolm's posts that she thought I couldn't see. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I found old screenshots where she bragged about manipulating me, telling friends she was so over the housewife fantasy and wanted someone who could keep up. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt calculated. Clara started texting more frequently, under the radar. He checks her phone now. She's not allowed to take calls after 9 p.m. She quit her gym because a trainer complimented her form. One message simply said, "She's already crying herself to sleep." I asked if she was safe. Clara said yes, for now, but Sierra was too proud to leave, even as the walls started closing in. Meanwhile, I made contact with Rachel, a nurse who dated Malcolm before Sierra. Found her through hospital grapevine. Took a few tries before she agreed to meet. She picked a diner on the far side of town and kept glancing at the door like she expected him to burst through it. She told me about the pills, how he'd made excuses, claimed old injuries, then lashed out when she questioned the dosage. When she tried to break it off, he threatened to have her blacklisted from all the nearby hospitals. "He's dangerous," she said, her voice low. "And he's protected. His father sits on the board." I asked if she'd make a statement. She shook her head, eyes wide. "I can't. I already lost too much. But if someone else connects the dots, if someone else blows the whistle, I won't cry." I thanked her, paid for her coffee, and left feeling like I was assembling a bomb one wire at a time. Clara told me about a housewarming party Sierra and Malcolm were throwing. Apparently, he bought a $1.3 million mansion in the city's wealthiest district and was eager to parade Sierra around like a trophy. Sierra had emptied her savings to furnish it. Her father was attending, reluctantly. Her mother refused. That was telling. Meanwhile, I reconnected with an old college friend, Marcus, who now worked for the state medical board. We had dinner. I brought up a hypothetical case involving unprescribed opioids, odd mood swings, and a pattern of dangerous behavior in New York. Marcus didn't ask for names. Just told me the process for submitting anonymous complaints. "Make it clean," he warned. "No vendettas. Just facts." Back at home, I finalized my files. Dates, texts, receipts, photos. I had enough to paint the full picture, and with Clara's continued updates, I knew exactly when to pull the trigger. The night before their party, I filed the complaint online with surgical inventory discrepancies, shift dates, patient interactions, and 3 anonymous staff witnesses quoted. I didn't need to fake anything. The truth, in this case, was enough. I sat back with a drink in hand and watched Murph stretch across my lap, peaceful, loyal, and utterly indifferent to the chaos I was unleashing. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. And Malcolm was about to discover what it felt like to lose everything you built on borrowed time. She showed up that Saturday just past noon, wearing oversized sunglasses and an expression like she was doing me a favor. Clara came with her, which was probably a smart move on Sierra's part, because if she'd brought that clown of a surgeon, I might have said something I couldn't take back. I had her boxes stacked on the porch already, packed exactly as requested, no better or worse than she deserved. I didn't look at her directly, just sat on the steps sipping cold coffee with Murph sprawled across my lap like a sleepy sentinel. Clara gave me a brief glance, her lips tight, and helped load the car in silence while Sierra moved like a storm cloud in heels. No thanks, no words, not even a fake apology. It was only when they were nearly done that Clara lingered a moment too long and said, "There's something you should probably know." I raised an eyebrow, waited. "She took the signed baseball and the gold watch," Clara whispered. "Said if you kept the ring, she deserved something valuable too." My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a molar, but I didn't say a word. I just nodded once and went back inside, closing the door behind me before the heat in my chest turned into something worse. Later that night, I opened the old gun safe where I kept both items, just in case of break-ins or, apparently, betrayal. Gone. Both gone. The watch was from my grandfather's time in Korea, engraved with initials and a date. The baseball had my dad's faded handwriting on the casing. Neither had a price tag, but they were worth more than that ring, more than the damn house, more than any of it. I sat in the dark, Murph curled against my side, and made a decision. I wasn't going to rage online or chase apologies I'd never get. I was going to work. The next morning I called Diane at the wedding venue and explained the engagement was off. She asked if I wanted the deposit back or transferred. I told her to put it in my name. She didn't ask for details, just quietly said, "Good for you." I took that energy and ran with it. logged into our shared cloud account, collected every incriminating photo and message into a folder labeled for court if needed. Then I started mapping patterns, comparing Sierra's client dinners with Malcolm's known surgeries, using the hospital's public scheduling board and the timestamps on her messages. There were overlaps so obvious they might as well have left a trail of breadcrumbs from my bank account to their bed. I cross-referenced everything. Each weekend getaway matched one of his off-call stretches. The luxury dinners coincided with her missing receipts. It all lined up like a case file waiting for a prosecutor. But I wasn't finished. I reached out to Rachel, the nurse Clara mentioned, the one Malcolm dumped after torching her career. She was hesitant at first, but when I told her I wasn't asking her to go public, she agreed to meet. We sat outside a hole-in-the-wall cafe near the edge of town, quiet enough that no one recognized us. She wore sunglasses and kept her voice low, but her words were sharp and confident. She told me Malcolm used to pop pills between shifts, claimed they were for a back injury, but his mood swings didn't match the story. One week, he was jittery and obsessive. The next, he'd crash for hours. She found Oxy in his locker once, unprescribed, and when she confronted him, he said if she ever went to HR, he'd tell them she was unstable and making threats. He knows how to manipulate systems, she said. He's done it before, and he'll do it again, unless someone finally makes it stick. I thanked her and promised confidentiality. She nodded, stood, and left without looking back. That same day, Clara sent me another update. Sierra was miserable. Malcolm had started policing her outfits, showing up to her client meetings unannounced, questioning her every interaction. She wasn't allowed to go out without texting him first. Clara said she saw bruises on her sister's wrist, and that Sierra made some excuse about bumping into a door. I didn't react outwardly. I wasn't about to feel sympathy for the woman who'd blown up my life, but I wasn't going to pretend I liked hearing that, either. People who thrive on control usually don't stop at one type. That night, I called my college buddy Ryan, who now worked at the state's medical board. We hadn't talked in years, but once I explained I had information about a physician potentially misusing prescriptions and compromising patient safety, he agreed to grab dinner. I kept it vague, just gave him facts. Erratic behavior, unverified meds, cross-referenced inconsistencies in logs. I didn't name names. He nodded, leaned back, and said, "If you have documented patterns, the anonymous reporting system works, especially if you back it with timestamps and detail." He handed me a card and told me not to fabricate anything. They take lies seriously, he warned. But if it's real, they'll act fast. I spent the weekend assembling the file, dates, screenshots, inventory records Joseph quietly helped me access. I left out emotions. No accusations, just verifiable discrepancies, timed perfectly before a high-profile surgery Malcolm was scheduled to perform. Clara told me they were hosting a massive housewarming that same weekend. She invited half the hospital board, she said. She's wearing a gold dress and pretending she's royalty. It's pathetic. I didn't ask for photos, but she sent them anyway. Sierra on his arm, glittering in rented jewelry, surrounded by people who smiled at her and didn't know the truth. I watched them toast with champagne, and I submitted the anonymous complaint that same night. Precise, cold, and full of facts I hoped would burn. The complaint I filed didn't take long to find its way into the right inbox. That Monday, the hospital implemented a surprise audit. New policy, they said, focused on surgical safety and accountability. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd planned it with a calendar and a pair of wiretaps. Malcolm's surgical team, the one scheduled to operate on a senator's daughter that morning, got pulled for random drug testing right before they scrubbed in. It wasn't a request, it was mandatory, and every single member had to comply before stepping into the OR. Word spread by Tuesday morning that Malcolm had a meltdown behind closed doors. Administrators called it a personnel disagreement, but the staff knew better. He stormed out of the meeting white as chalk, slamming doors and barking into his phone in the parking lot like he'd just realized the ceiling was finally caving in. Joseph, bless him, texted me updates without asking questions. He's off the rotation for the week, came Wednesday's message. People are whispering. Something's coming. By Friday, The hospital grapevine had turned into a full-blown fire alarm. Malcolm had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his handling of prescription meds and conduct in the OR. They didn't say it publicly, but everyone knew what was happening. I waited quietly, keeping my head down at work, letting Murph sleep across my desk while I sorted out client files and pretended I hadn't just kneecapped someone's golden career with a laptop and an internet connection. That weekend, Clara called in a panic. She never panicked. Her voice was shaky, clipped, like she was trying not to cry or scream, or maybe both. "Everything's falling apart," she said. "Malcolm's license is suspended. Sierra's freaking out. They're fighting every day. He's paranoid, yelling about cameras and sabotage." I asked if Sierra was safe, and Clara hesitated before answering. "I don't know." She says yes, but last night he shoved her into a wall. That silence between us was loud enough to break windows. I didn't say anything at first. Then I told Clara to document everything and keep a bag packed just in case. 2 days later, Malcolm got the axe. The board voted to terminate his contract, and his malpractice insurer threatened to pull coverage unless he stepped down voluntarily. Sierra had tied herself to a man who was now unemployed, disgraced, and sinking under the weight of lawsuits and criminal investigations. Worse, she'd put her name on a lease for a house that wasn't fully paid for, emptied her savings to furnish it, and now had no stable income of her own. Her company placed her on indefinite leave, citing reputation risk due to the drug scandal. She went from rooftop parties to bouncing between friends' apartments like a nomad with designer luggage. Then, late one night, just after midnight, my doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw Malcolm on my porch, swaying, slurring, clearly drunk. He pounded on the door, shouting about how I'd ruined his life, threatening legal action and payback I wouldn't see coming. I didn't respond, just recorded everything and called the cops. He stumbled off before they arrived, but I sent the footage to a contact at the department, got a report filed, and added it to the growing file of insurance I was building like a wall around my piece. 2 days later, one of my truck tires started losing air slowly. Not a slash, just a puncture, subtle and irritating. The same night, my mailbox was knocked off its post and left dangling like someone wanted me to know they'd been there. I didn't flinch. I upgraded the cameras, added motion sensors, and logged every incident. I wasn't going to react like he wanted. I wasn't going to give him the dignity of knowing he still had room in my head. That Friday night, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Sierra. Makeup streaked, eyes red, hair tangled like she hadn't brushed it in a week. She looked hollow, and for the first time, she didn't try to pretend otherwise. "Grant," she whispered through the speaker. "Please, I need to talk to you." I considered ignoring her, letting her stand there in the cold night air until she gave up. But I opened the door and stood in the frame, blocking the entrance. "What do you want?" I asked, voice low and even. "Everything's falling apart," she said. "Malcolm's lost everything. He's drinking. He shoved me last night. I have nowhere else to go." I let her speak, but I didn't soften. "You want to stay here?" I asked. "After what you did? After you left me a breakup note in a hoodie pocket on my birthday and stole from my father's safe?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second I saw a flicker of the person I once loved. "I was wrong," she said. "I got caught up in the idea of something better. It wasn't real. You were real. I see that now." I shook my head. "You don't get to come back just because reality hit harder than you expected. This isn't a shelter for people who wreck their own lives." She looked stunned, like she'd honestly thought I'd say yes. "So that's it. You're leaving me out here with nothing." I shrugged. "You did that all on your own. I just closed the door you burned." As I turned to go back inside, she hissed the words I'd been expecting for weeks. "It was you, wasn't it? You reported him." I looked over my shoulder. I wasn't the only one. Turns out you two burned more bridges than you realized. Some people were just waiting for someone to light the match. She didn't come back after that. But Malcolm did. One more time, drunk before noon, screaming about lawyers and defamation while staggering around my driveway. I called the cops again. This time, they arrested him for public intoxication and trespassing. That afternoon, Sierra's father, Elijah, came to my house. He stood on the porch in a too-expensive coat with his hands in his pockets and a look that suggested his world had collapsed alongside his daughter's. "She needs help," he said. "She's unstable. She's lost everything." I leaned against the doorway and asked why that was my problem. "Because you once cared," he said. "And because you're the only one who hasn't turned your back entirely." I let that hang for a second. Then I told him the truth. I did care. Deeply. But the person I cared for doesn't exist anymore. She made choices. I'm just living with the fallout. He offered money. $50,000 to let her stay in my spare room while she figured things out. I refused. Not because I didn't need the money, but because peace was worth more now. And because no amount of cash would ever justify inviting chaos back into a house I'd only just reclaimed as mine. The silence that followed was the best gift I'd gotten in years. No more desperate calls, no more late night pounding on my front door, and no more guilt pretending it still mattered. Sierra moved back in with her parents after wearing out her welcome with every friend she had. Clara said her dad finally stopped defending her after she accused her mother of sabotaging her life by never believing in her relationship. From what I gathered, the house had turned into a war zone of whispered blame and tiptoeing around conversations no one wanted to have. Elijah stopped calling me after I turned down his third offer, $75 grand, that time, and still not worth it. Malcolm's collapse was even more satisfying than I imagined it would be. His license didn't just get suspended. It was permanently revoked after the board uncovered that he'd been using other physicians' DEA numbers to fill scripts for himself. They found oxycodone and Ativan tied to logins that weren't his, and a few brave nurses came forward with stories that matched mine and Rachel's timeline perfectly. His name made the local news in a scandal recap column, and by the time they raided his home, the $1.3 million property was already in foreclosure proceedings. Clara sent me a photo of his Maserati being towed from the hospital garage in broad daylight. According to her, the custodians clapped. I never posted anything publicly. No cryptic messages, no dramatic quotes, no digital victory lap. That wasn't the point. Watching the fallout unfold from a distance was enough. Sierra's social media became a carousel of hollow affirmations about forgiveness, growth, and spiritual rebirth. "Sometimes we must lose everything to find ourselves," one post read. The comments section, once overflowing with heart emojis and congratulatory nonsense, had gone dry. Her old colleagues stopped tagging her. She quietly removed the company name from her bio after her leave turned into a termination. A rep linked to a prescription fraud scandal wasn't someone they could keep on the roster, no matter how many sales she closed before the disaster. I saw her once more in person, driving through downtown in my newly detailed truck, now fitted with all-terrain tires and a fresh sound system I'd installed myself. She was at a red light, sitting behind the wheel of her dad's hand-me-down Buick, hair tied up in a messy bun, staring at nothing in particular. Our eyes met for half a second. I gave her the same look I might have given a stranger asking for directions. Blank, polite, uninterested. Then the light changed and I drove away. That was all it took. No gesture, no smug expression. Just me not looking back. Funny thing was, that night I didn't even think about her. Not until I opened my front door and saw Murph curled up beside Cooper, the rescue dog I finally had the space and peace to adopt. He's a lab shepherd mix with ears too big for his head and a habit of falling asleep upside down. They both looked up when I came in, then went right back to sleep. No drama, no questions, just loyalty and comfort. I sat down in my dad's old recliner, the one Sierra always hated, and realized the house finally felt like mine again. Work got better too. I'd been grinding through overtime during the whole breakup mess, throwing myself into projects to avoid thinking too hard. It paid off. My boss called me in 2 months later and offered me a lead role on a statewide infrastructure initiative. The pay bump wasn't life-changing, but the trust? That felt like something I'd earned the hard way. I said yes before he finished his pitch. Clara and I kept in touch. It started as coffee once a week, where she'd tell me about her job at the library and I'd update her on Cooper's latest training mishaps. Then we added lunch. Then dinner. Then one night she came over and brought a bottle of wine and stayed until sunrise. We took it slow, glacial even. Both of us scarred in different ways, cautious not to trip over the wreckage left behind by the people we once trusted too much. But it was real, honest, quiet. Everything Sierra's chaos never was. She found out, eventually. Clara and I were at her parents' house for a casual dinner when Sierra stopped by unannounced, walked in with that high and mighty posture she always used when she thought she still had influence. Her jaw locked the second she saw us at the table, Clara's hand resting lightly on mine. What followed wasn't even an argument. It was a meltdown. Accusations, screeching, dramatic hand gestures. She said I was just using Clara to get revenge, called her own sister a traitor, said I'd always been bitter and small, trying to hurt her in the pettiest way possible. Clara didn't raise her voice once. She waited until Sierra ran out of steam, then said 5 words that shut the room down. Not everything is about you. That was the end of it. Afterward, Clara's mom hugged her tight. Her dad didn't say much, just shook my hand with a look I couldn't quite read. Maybe guilt, maybe relief, maybe both. I didn't need his approval. I had peace, and peace beats applause every damn time. So yeah, Reddit, that's how it all went down. A year ago, I was planning a wedding with a woman who smiled at me while packing her bags behind my back. Now I've got a house that actually feels like home, a job that challenges me, a partner who listens, and a life no longer built on lies I was too stubborn to question. Sometimes the best revenge isn't rage or exposure or even justice. It's walking past the wreckage without needing to pick anything up. It's watching the people who tried to bury you trip over the hole they dug, and realizing you're too far ahead for them to matter anymore. And me? I'm finally happy to let them disappear in the rearview.